Hello, this is Mrs. Dehn-Brastad, and today we're going to talk about Chapter 1, Section 4, which is on different relationships between angles, especially pairs of angles, a number. Our objectives for today's lesson are to identify adjacent, vertical, complementary, and supplementary angles, and also to find the measures of pairs of angles. Here's our important terms for today. You'll see there's fewer than the last few sections: adjacent, linear, complementary, supplementary, and vertical angles. You will use these through the rest of the year in all of the geometry chapters to follow, or almost all of them. These will come up again. So memorize these, learn them well this chapter. There's a lot of special relationships in angles, and we're going to learn some of these. If you recognize that angles have these special relationships, you can find missing angle measures. Our first two that we're going to look at is adjacent angles. Adjacent angles is when you have two angles in the same plane that have a common vertex. Right here's their common vertex, and they also have a common side. So that ray there is shared between angle 1 and angle 2. So those are called adjacent angles, basically next to each other, and they're touching as well. Those are adjacent. They have a shared side, common side. A linear pair is when you have two angles that add together to equal 180 degrees, or in this specific definition it says whose non-common sides are opposite rays, but they add to 180 degrees or a straight line. Straight angle, that is called sometimes too. And they have to be adjacent. So they're adjacent and they add up to 180 degrees. Both parts have to be true. Okay, in this example we're going to be looking at this figure and see if these given angles are adjacent and a linear pair, or not adjacent at all. Remember, to be a linear pair, they have to be adjacent first. So the first thing is to find these angles. Angle AEB. Now remember, when you name an angle, the vertex is the middle letter. So here's our vertex. The A and the B are on the sides of the angle. So angle AEB is this green one right here. The other angle that we're looking at is BED. Well, same vertex, B, E, D, but this time, this purple one, I'm going to draw it in purple. So did they share a side? They did. They shared side EB. So they're definitely adjacent. Do they also form a linear pair? Did they make 180 degrees when we add them together? They do. So then they are adjacent angles and they form a linear pair. Now let's look at this one. First we have to, is this the same one? Oh no, two different, it's the same drawing, but we're talking about two different angles. So AEB, I've got the purple pen, so here's AEB. And then the other angle, I'll change my color to blue here, BEC. BEC. So if they share a common side, they're adjacent. They do, because I drew the purple and the blue on top of each other. So they're definitely adjacent. Do they form a linear pair? Well, no, because this time they didn't make a straight angle. They're not they can't be not adjacent because we already picked that they're adjacent. So in these ones, you're going to say they're only adjacent. Okay, one more to try. DEC. DEC. There's DEC and AEB. AEB. Now, this time I did not have a common side. They don't touch each other. So they can't be a linear pair, because linear pairs always are adjacent. So they're just not adjacent. There's nothing else that they can be because they don't have a common side. All right, so now you're going to try this one. Look at angle 5 and angle 6 and decide whether they are only adjacent, and form a linear pair, or not adjacent at all. And you probably already decided, but here's angle 5 and here's angle 6. They shared a common side, so that means they are adjacent. If they also form a straight line, which they do, then they're a linear pair. So they are adjacent and a linear pair. Okay, here's another one to try. Angle 7 and angle SPU. So find those two angles and decide whether or not they're adjacent only, adjacent and a linear pair, or not adjacent at all. So here's angle 7 and angle, whoops, sorry about that. Where was I? Right there, okay. And then angle SPU is SPU. Here's angle SPU. Now this one's a little tricky. They did share a common side, didn't they? But they don't have, they're not, I don't know how to say it, but they're not next to each other. They're not adjacent. They're like overlapping. So they're not adjacent. They had this vertex here, and they had a side, but it's not a side that is next to each other. It's actually overlapping. So then we have to say that they're not adjacent. Here's angle 7. Here's angle 8. Real quickly decide. And they're not adjacent. That one's easy to tell because they're not touching each other. Okay, 2 more words for today is complementary and supplementary. You have to know the difference here. You have to memorize which one's which. Complementary is when you have 2 angles whose measures have a sum of 90. So if you take angle A plus angle B, well actually the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B, it has to equal 90 degrees. Supplementary is when you add the measures of the 2 angles up and you get 180 degrees. Some people remember it as supplementary starts with an S, and so does straight line. But they don't have to be adjacent. So in this example, if you just can find 2 angles that add together to equal 180, even if they're not touching, let's see, 7 plus 3 is 10, 8, 180. So if I added 53 and 127 together, I would get a straight line. So they're supplementary. So if you think about moving angle A down here, move it down here, then you would have a straight line. So supplementary is straight, 180 degrees, complementary is 90. But they don't have to be adjacent. They can be, but they don't have to be. We can use complementary and supplementary. If we know they're complementary or supplementary, we can use a little bit of algebra to find the other angle. So if they're complementary, you can just go 90 minus x to find the other one. If they're supplementary, you can go 180 minus x to find the measure of the other angle. All right, so here we have an angle, 59 degrees, and we want to find its complement. So we want to find the angle so that if we added them together, we would get a 90-degree angle. So to do that, you just go 90 minus 59 degrees, and you will get the measure of its complement. And that would be 31 degrees. For supplementary, we want to find the measure of the angle so that when we add these 2 angles together, we would get a straight line, or 180 degrees. So 180 minus 7x plus 10, and that's why we did that warm-up problem. We would have to take minus 7x and then minus 10. So 180 minus 7x minus 10, and then we would combine our like terms and get 170 minus 7x degrees. And we would just leave it like that. We can't find an actual number because we have an x in the problem.